Mason Riley rolled up to the orphanage to pick out a new sister. All the girls huddled together, hoping to be the chosen one, but I decided to duck into the closet and catch some Z's. I figured I could dodge the fate of becoming the Riley family's adopted daughter. Just like in my past life, where I ended up as Mason's wife. I was all about living free and happy this time around. But when I woke up, there was Mason standing right outside the closet door, flashing a grin and saying, "Hey, Lily, I'm here to take you home." Seeing Mason's face pop up made me think I was still trapped in some bad dream. Suddenly, the director's stern voice cut through. "Lily, why are you hiding in here and sleeping?" Snap! I woke up realizing it wasn't a nightmare. Frozen in place, the director grabbed me and pulled me out of the closet. She straightened my collar and shoved me towards the Riley couple. "You dozed off, and the young Master Riley even said not to wake you. Everyone's been waiting for you for a while now." Mason Riley, the kid they named, stood there with a faint smile, looking at me. At that moment, he seemed different from the Mason I remembered, always kind of distant. He took the lead and said, "Hey, Lily." Hearing Lily from his mouth felt oddly weird. I frowned and avoided his gaze, still confused. They clearly could have picked someone else. So why were they so set on waiting for me? The director leaned in to explain, "They want to adopt you, Lily. You'll have a family, a mom, a dad, and a brother." Normally strict, the director rarely smiled at me. I figured she was probably happy for me. The kids at the orphanage were lucky to be adopted. But the director didn't know I was reborn. I knew Mason would come today to choose a sister, so I deliberately hid in the closet. "Lily, will you come home with us?" Mrs. Riley gently held my hand. "Mason's always wanted a sister. You can be his sister from now on." This scene was just like my past life. Memories flashed like a slideshow. I immediately pulled my hand back and looked up at the director. "I don't want to be adopted by them." Everyone was shocked when I said that, especially Mason, who frowned and asked, "Why?" "Because I don't want to be your sister." Even though I rejected him, there was no anger on Mason's face. His tone softened, with a hint of barely noticeable affection. "Then you don't have to be my sister. Just come home with me and live together, okay?" The director tried to tug at my sleeve secretly, but couldn't stop me from saying no to Mason again. I thought Mason would back off, but when the director asked the Riley couple if they wanted to choose another girl, Mason suddenly spoke up loudly. "Mom, I just want her." He said she looked the most like my sister in my previous life. Mason picked me out of many girls because I reminded him of his sister back then. Knowing I was chosen, I felt like luck was truly on my side. I was brought back to the Riley family and renamed Lily Riley. I even got my own room in their huge mansion. Though it didn't really belong to me, I was content. Mrs. Riley mentioned that kids from the orphanage often had a small-town mindset and couldn't behave right, so I had to change my old habits and become less like myself. Mrs. Riley was strict with me, had to practice the piano for over 12 hours a day, even though the teacher clearly said I had no talent. She still came to watch me practice every day, but some things can't be forced. "Sorry, Mom, I still can't play well," I'd say each time I messed up. Mrs. Riley would look at me more lovingly and comfort me, saying, "It's okay, as long as Lily tries hard, you'll get better." Later, I found out playing piano was Mrs. Riley's late daughter's hobby. She treated me this way to see a part of her daughter in me, but I didn't care. A fish out of water doesn't worry about the cleanliness of its water. It just wants to survive. Water was like love to me. As long as it existed, that was enough. I worked harder to learn the piano to please Mrs. Riley. We grew closer, more like a real mother and daughter, until at Mason's engagement party. He got drugged, and I accidentally barged into his room. Mr. Riley fainted out of anger when he saw me with Mason. Mrs. Riley slapped me across the face, saying, "I should never have brought you into the Riley family." Mason watched me silently, his eyes filled with emotions I couldn't grasp. I think he probably regretted it. Regretted choosing me as his sister. I didn't know what happened. I didn't drug Mason. I tried hard to explain, but no one believed me. Later, when Mason betrayed me in our marriage numerous times, he always said, "You went as far as forcing me to marry you. Your brother now. All this is your retribution." Mason hated me, so after marriage, he always liked to embarrass me in public. Many people in the circle bet on how long our marriage would last, at most a year. Once the child was born, Mason would kick me out, But the results surprised everyone. Mason and I were tangled for 19 years, and even after my death, the tombstone still read, Wife of Mason Riley Lilly. Tell me why you didn't want to be adopted by the Riley family? After Mason and his parents left, the director called me to her office. I stayed silent for a while before casually coming up with a reason. I don't want to leave you and everyone else. The director nodded and advised me to think it over again. I knew she meant well and hoped I'd have a good future, but I didn't want to repeat the same mistakes or have any more ties with Mason Riley. However, a big fire at night shattered all my plans. Did you start the fire at the hospital? I looked coldly at Mason and questioned him. No, the fire department already determined it was caused by old wiring. Mason quickly explained, then laughed self-deprecatingly. Lily, you think too badly of me in this life. I've only met him 2 or 3 times, but Mason's attitude towards me feels strangely familiar. I just want to help you. As long as you agree to come home with me, I'll cover all the treatment costs. The director mentioned that last night the orphanage caught fire and she was badly burned trying to save us. I sneered and mocked. Taking advantage of others' misfortune doesn't make you a good person. Mason didn't explain himself. He just said, Lily, it's okay if you don't want to be my sister. You can just stay at the Riley house temporarily. He tried to coax me gently, compromising, but I was even more curious. Why do you keep taking me to the Riley house? Mason said, because my mom has been missing my sister a lot lately and you look a lot like her. I want to take you home to keep her company. I was somewhat convinced by his words. Mason's behavior towards me was indeed unusual. I asked him, is that all? Mason hesitated for a moment before nodding. That's all? Although I didn't want to get involved with Mason, the director was still lying in the hospital bed. On the way to the Riley house, Mason kept talking to me, but I stayed silent. He probably knew he was annoying, so he softened his tone, trying to make amends. The Riley house can give you better conditions. It's better than the orphanage. Lily, don't blame me. I'm doing this for your own good. I'm doing this for your own good, Mason said, just like in my past life. Mason hated me for most of his life. It wasn't until I was about to die that his attitude softened a bit, but by then, I was beyond medical help, and my only company was a little cat. On a whim, Mason visited the mansion where I was staying and had my cat, which I had raised for 6 months, thrown away. I asked him why. He looked at me and said, I'm doing this for your own good. At that moment, I realized when he said it was for my good, he didn't really mean it. Those words were just an excuse to satisfy his own desires and need for control, or maybe another way for him to torment me. After all, that was his usual way. Whatever I liked, he would destroy it. As soon as the car arrived at the Riley house, I saw Mrs. Riley already waiting at the mansion's entrance. Mason had told her in advance that he would bring me back, so she had someone prepare a room on the 2nd floor early on. Lily, this will be your room from now on. Mrs. Riley held my hand tightly. Do you like it? I lowered my eyes, looking at Mrs. Riley's hand, stunned for a moment before pulling it back. I was no longer the Lily who longed for motherly love in my past life. Mrs. Riley, this is your biological daughter's room, isn't it? It has a lot of her old things, and you've kept them well. It's clear you cherish these items. If I stay in this room and accidentally damage something, you'd definitely be upset. I see there are guest rooms downstairs. I'll stay in a guest room. Mrs. Riley looked at me, wanting to say something, but Mason interrupted. Lily wants to stay downstairs. Please have the maid help prepare a room. I looked at Mason, who spoke up for me. He probably didn't know the real reason I didn't want to stay on the 2nd floor was because his bedroom was right next door. In my previous life, before Mason got engaged, our relationship was quite harmonious. During my teenage years, Mrs. Riley once asked me, Lily, what kind of boys do you like? I looked at Mason, who had just come back from a run, and joked, I like boys like my brother. This casual joke became evidence years later that I had drugged my own brother. Every time I tried to explain, I didn't drug you, Mason would choke me and retort, you said you liked me when you were 16. You liked me for so many years. And in the end, you even used medicine to force me to marry you. How can you deny it now? It was probably because I was back in this mansion that I dreamed about my past life. That night, during the last days of my life, the doctor said staying alone all day isn't a solution. Call your family and friends to keep you company. I don't have any family. As for friends, my best friend used to be Mason's fiance, named Jake Green. Jake only returned to the country in the 5th year of my marriage to Mason. Mason personally went to the airport to pick him up and even organized a welcome party for him. Someone deliberately recorded a video of the gathering and sent it to me. The two of them were sitting in a corner, passionately kissing. I watched that video over and over the entire night. It was that night I decided to give up on our second child and asked Mason for a divorce. He asked me, "What's the reason?" I showed him the video. "Mason, I know you married me out of obligation, but now that Jake is back and it seems he has forgiven you, we should get divorced and move on with our lives." Actually, I had already asked Mason for a divorce several times before, but he always refused. I thought with Jake back, he would agree this time. But Mason still tore up the divorce papers I had prepared and deleted the video from my phone. "Lily, Lily!" I suddenly woke up to Mason slapping me across the face. The teenage Mason looked at me with hurt in his eyes. "I heard you crying from outside, so I came in to check on you." After saying that, he turned and walked out. He stopped at the door and said, "Get up and have breakfast or you'll be late for school." Just like in my past life, the Riley family transferred me to Mason's school. Seeing me follow him into the classroom, someone asked him, "Mason, who is she?" Mason introduced me to them. "This is Lily. She's currently staying with my family." Uh, I vaguely remembered that in my past life, before the incident with the drugging, Mason always introduced me to others as his sister, Lily. As I looked at Mason, who was just a step away from me, I suddenly realized he seemed different from the Mason in my memories. He didn't look like the teenage Mason from my past life, nor did he resemble the Mason who later constantly sought revenge and tormented me. My heart skipped a beat as I suddenly thought of something. Just as I called out to Mason, ready to voice my doubts, someone else called his name at the same time. Mason glanced at me and then looked over my shoulder. I turned around too. Standing at the classroom door, calling him, was Jessie Green. "Mason, wait for me after school. I have something to tell you." After speaking, Jessie finally noticed me standing next to Mason. Her gaze towards me was unfriendly. She looked me up and down in a challenging manner. "So you're the girl staying with the Rileys, after all." She was my best friend in my past life. Almost as soon as Jessie looked at me, I could feel her obvious hostility. This was completely different from my past life, where after Jessie found out I was Mason's sister, she would affectionately hold my arm, call me Lily, and bring me into her social circle. But now, her attitude was more like the last time I saw her in my past life, which ended very unpleasantly. I asked her, "The surveillance showed that only you and I entered Mason's room that day. I didn't drug him, so it was you, wasn't it?" Back then, I couldn't understand. She liked Mason so much. Why would she ruin their engagement party? "Her name is Lily." Mason answered for me. Jessie looked at me, gave a forced smile, and said nothing more. After that, I sat at my desk but noticed Jessie frequently turning to look at me, which felt strange. I had to ignore her and focus on the lesson. In my past life, I didn't do well in my studies, but Mrs. Riley didn't mind my poor grades. It seemed the worse I did, the happier Mrs. Riley became. She always said Lily was becoming more and more like her daughter. She also didn't like studying. Parents always plan for their children's future. What mother would hope her daughter is nothing but a beautiful but useless person? In the end, she never truly saw me as her daughter. To her, I was probably just a toy to console herself. In this life, I didn't want to be like in my past life, spending the first half as a stand-in for someone else's daughter and the second half as a useless canary dying in sorrow. So studying was my only way out. But studying wasn't easy. Realizing I really couldn't understand the knowledge in these books, I stood up in frustration. Jake, who had been talking to someone, noticed my movement and turned to ask, "Where are you going?" I answered impatiently, "The restroom." In my memory, the girls' restroom in high school always had a line during breaks. But today, unexpectedly, there was no one. It wasn't until I pushed open the restroom door that I sensed something was wrong. Several girls inside turned around almost simultaneously to look at me standing by the door. The one closest to me was Jessie Green. She threw away a cigarette but glanced at the girl they had pinned to the ground, covered in dirty water, and then walked towards me. She smiled and said, "I'm just messing around with her. You won't tell Mason, will you?" Looking at the cigarette on the ground, I suddenly realized I never really knew Jessie. Otherwise, how could I not know she smoked and bullied her classmates in high school? Thinking for a moment, I said, "I'm not that close to Mason." Jessie asked, "But aren't you staying at his house?" I met her gaze. "I'm just staying at his house, but we're not close." She nodded. "That's good." After saying that, she quickly left with the others. Once everyone had left, I glanced at the girl on the ground. I quickly looked away and walked into a stall. When I came out, the girl was standing with her back to me by the mop sink. She was only wearing a tank top, and her shirt was being washed under the faucet. Hearing the sound of the door opening, she quickly took off her shirt, put it on, and ran out with her head down. As she passed by me, I suddenly reached out and grabbed her. The girl looked at me in confusion, and I looked at her after a long silent stare. I remembered her name was Emma. I took off my jacket and threw it to her. "Your shirt is wet. Mine too." Emma lowered her head again and refused. "No need, a wet shirt is see-through. They'll see your tank top underneath." My words made Emma's ears turn red. She awkwardly raised her hand to cover her chest, hesitated for a while, then took my jacket. Seeing Emma walk into the stall to change, I secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Actually, I'm not someone who likes to meddle in other people's business. In my past life, Emma jumped off a building and took her own life just a few days after I transferred here. The school's explanation was that it was due to family issues and too much academic pressure, but now it seems maybe her reason for suicide wasn't that simple, after all. It was a young life. "Thank you, Emma," she said after changing her clothes. "You're welcome," were the words on the tip of my tongue, but I swallowed them back. After thinking for a moment, I asked Emma, "Your grades must be really good, right?" I remembered Emma was the top student in the grade before she jumped. She was stunned for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, Emma." I looked at the jacket she was wearing. "I'll lend you my jacket. You help me with my studies." I didn't give her a chance to refuse and continued, "After the quiz, we'll change seats so we can be desk mates and you can help me with my studies." Emma hesitated for a long time before agreeing. After school, Mason stubbornly insisted I ride home with him. As soon as I got in the car, Jessie called him. "Mason, can we talk?" I wasn't interested in their conversation and didn't want to eavesdrop, but it was quiet here, and Jessie was emotional and loud. Their conversation carried on and reached my ears. Jessie asked, "Mason, did you break up with me because of Lily?" Mason replied, "We've been together so long. As soon as Lily appeared, you broke up with me besides her. I can't think of any other reason." Mason's tone was somewhat helpless. "It has nothing to do with anyone." Jessie said, "I just suddenly realized I don't have romantic feelings for you. I've always seen you as a sister." In an instant, I understood why Jessie had been paying so much attention to me today, frequently turning around to look at me during class and dinner. Mrs. Riley suddenly said, "Lily, I found a piano teacher for you today starting tomorrow," but was interrupted by Mason. "Mom, Lily doesn't like the piano. Please don't force your hobbies on her." Mrs. Riley smiled awkwardly but didn't say anything more. I looked up at Mason, further confirming my suspicions. In this life, I had never told Mason that I didn't like the piano. The only person who knew I didn't like the piano was Mason, from my previous life. Back then, after he threw away my cat, my condition worsened rapidly. Despite our mutual dislike, Mason unexpectedly put aside his work and moved back to the mansion to take care of me. It coincided with our 19th wedding anniversary. Mason gave me a Steinway piano that was airshipped from abroad, even though I said I didn't like it. I only learned it because my mom liked it. Mason still gave me a set of jewelry that evening. Suddenly, he seemed like a different person, meticulous and patient with me. "How do you know Lily doesn't like the piano?" Mrs. Riley persisted and asked, "Lily, do you want to learn the piano?" I quickly gathered my thoughts and smiled as I declined her offer. "Mrs. Riley, I have to study, so I really don't have time to learn the piano." After dinner, I was about to go back to my room to rest when Mason called out to me, "Lily, after the quiz tomorrow, seats will be assigned based on scores. Where do you want to sit?" Seeing that I didn't respond, he continued, "How about the 5th row by the window?" This was the spot I always sat in during my previous life. He looked at me intently, expecting some feedback from me. I glanced at him deeply and casually said, "Whatever." My nonchalant response made Mason unusually excited. Until the next day, he watched me pass by and sit next to Emma. "Lily," Mason called me in front of everyone. He forced a smile and asked, "Did you sit in the wrong place?" "No, I didn't." Mason stood there awkwardly, and after a while, he silently sat down. "Aren't you the first one to choose a seat? Why did you pick this one?" I couldn't help but complain to Emma. Emma chose a terrible seat right in the middle of the front row. I'm nearsighted, I can't see the blackboard. If I sit too far, I usually don't wear glasses. Seeing my skepticism, Emma explained openly, "I don't have extra money, so I didn't get glasses." Oh, I thought, she chose this terrible seat on purpose to keep others from sitting next to me. Emma looked up from her test paper and honestly told me, "You're overthinking it." Whether I was overthinking or not, after school, I still dragged Emma to the optician outside the school and forced her to get a pair of glasses. I excused it by saying, "If you can't see the blackboard and your grades drop, who will tutor me? Consider these glasses as my tutoring fee." Anyway, I used Mason's money. He owes me so much. What's wrong with spending a bit of his money? I only intended to get Emma a pair of glasses, but unexpectedly, it made her cry. She didn't shed a tear when Jessie and her friends bullied her, but when I put the glasses on her, she broke down in tears. Emma kept sobbing and said, "Lily, I will definitely repay you when I have money in the future." I finally managed to comfort her. On the way back to the classroom, Mason stopped me in the stairwell. He questioned me, "Why didn't you choose the seat we agreed on?" "Who agreed with you?" I impatiently retorted, "Mason Riley, did I promise you anything?" He was instantly speechless. He looked at me for a long time before speaking again. "Lily, why is everything different now? Are you also—" I smiled back at him. "Am I also what?" Unfortunately, Mason didn't answer me, but his stopping me in the stairwell reached Jessie's ears. After class, Jessie came to warn me herself. "Stay away from Mason Riley." Out of concern, Emma also advised me, "Lily, you should stay away from Mason Riley. Try not to interact with him." To convince me, she even told me about why Jessie bullied her before. "Mason only asked me a question once," Jessie said, "and I was trying to seduce him." "Lily, Jessie isn't someone to mess with. I'm afraid she'll cause you trouble." I couldn't wait to stay away from Mason, but he was like a persistent ghost, always appearing around me at unexpected times. I silently sighed, putting down the exercises in my hand, and reached out to hug the worried Emma. "Don't worry." However, Emma's worries soon came true. "Can we talk?" Jessie stopped me in the hallway. I originally wanted to refuse, but seeing the undisguised hatred in her eyes, I suddenly changed my mind. "Sure." In this life, Jessie's attitude towards me was vastly different. Sometimes I even suspected that, like Mason and me, she had also been reborn. "What do you want to talk about?" I took 2 steps closer to her and asked. Jessie didn't say anything. She only glanced at me disdainfully. When the voices from the stairwell grew louder, she said nothing more. "Nothing. If you weren't fostered by the Riley family, you wouldn't even have the right to talk to me." As soon as she finished speaking, she fell backward. Mason happened to see her fall as he was coming up the stairs. "Lily, why did you push me?" Jessie cried and questioned me. Her words immediately drew reproachful looks from the surrounding students who didn't know what had happened. Mason frowned but said nothing. He looked up at me, standing in the hallway, then asked a few boys to take Jessie to the hospital. Jessie was still crying to Mason as she left. "Mason, my leg hurts so much. Will I never be able to dance again?" Mason comforted her with a few words and watched her leave. After everyone dispersed, Mason walked up to me. He looked down at me and said, "Go apologize to Jessie." "Why should I apologize? She fell on her own," I said. Mason sighed deeply. "Jessie studies dance. Are you saying she would use her own legs, her own future to frame you?" "Lily, I know you hate Jessie, but that was all," he said. Suddenly, Mason realized something and stopped talking. I sneered and deliberately asked him, "All what, Mason? I just transferred here and have no conflicts with Jessie Green. Why don't you tell me why I would hate her?" Mason silently looked at me. "The more you try to hide the fact that you were reborn, the more I want to expose you. Because you know, like me, you were reborn, right? You know that in our past lives, Jessie Green did many things to hurt me. You think I hate her, so I would retaliate by pushing her down the stairs, right?" I thought that having said so much, he would at least be somewhat honest. But Mason's lips moved for a long time, and in the end, he still denied it. "I don't understand what you're saying, but if you did something wrong, you should apologize. Will you go with me to apologize to Jessie?" I laughed in anger. "Mason, you're still the same even after living another life. You're still a coward who only deceives himself, afraid to face the mistakes you made in your past life. So you don't dare admit that you've been reborn." My words made Mason's pupils tremble, but soon he turned his head away, avoiding my gaze. "I'll go check on Jessie." After saying that, he quickly turned around. I didn't know if he was really worried about Jessie or just wanted to escape from me as soon as possible, but I wasn't going to let him go just like that. I quickly caught up with him. "Don't you think I pushed her? Then of course I need to see her and let her think carefully again whether it was really me who pushed her." When Mason and I arrived at the hospital, Jessie's leg was already in a cast. She was lying on the hospital bed and started crying as soon as she saw me. "Mason, the doctor said my leg is seriously injured. I'm so scared." She turned and questioned me. "Lily, why did you push me? You know I dance, my legs can't get injured." I listened quietly until she finished, then smiled and asked her, "Jessie, are you sure it was me who pushed you down the stairs? There were only the two of us at the time. If it wasn't you, who else could it be?" She was emotional and acted convincingly. "I've been dancing since I was a child. You know how much I cherish my legs." "You ruined me? My parents won't let you off, Lily. Just wait to be expelled from school." Mason patted Jessie's back soothingly, then turned and ordered me again, "Lily, apologize." I ignored him and just looked at Jessie. "You think there are no cameras in the stairwell, so you can frame me, right? Jessie, I suggest you find someone to check again to see if there are any cameras you missed nearby." Jessie's face stiffened for a moment. I noticed her subtle expression. Jessie hadn't been reborn, because if she had, she would have known that the cameras from the opposite teaching building could capture the area. I was a bit disappointed. I was about to leave. Mason originally planned to leave with me, but Jessie stopped him. "Mason, my leg hurts so much. Can you stay with me?" Mason glanced at Jessie, then called out to me, "Lily, wait for me outside." "Like hell I'll wait for him," I said. I would wait for him. I walked out of the hospital without looking back. As soon as I returned to school, Emma called from behind. She handed me a USB drive, panting. "What's this?" Emma took several deep breaths before saying, "I heard from your classmates about what happened between you and Jessie. There are no cameras in the hallway to prove your innocence. I searched for a long time and finally found cameras in the opposite teaching building that captured what happened. Jessie's dad is one of the school's shareholders. I was afraid they might delete the footage, so I hurried to the security room and secretly copied it." Instantly, a warm feeling surged through my heart. I affectionately hooked my arm around Emma's and acted playfully. "Emma, you're so good to me." Emma adjusted her glasses on her nose. Even though she tried to hide it, I still noticed her ears turning red. She awkwardly suppressed a smile and said coldly, "Hurry back to the classroom. Midterm exams are coming up. You need to study hard." Unfortunately, the footage Emma worked so hard to copy wasn't needed. That night, Jessie was sneaking around the corridor looking for the cameras when Mason and I, who had returned to school to get something, caught her before I could speak. Mason had already walked up and asked her, "What are you doing here alone at night?" Jessie stammered for a long time, unable to come up with a suitable excuse. I couldn't stand the awkwardness, so I kindly helped her out. "She's worried, so she came back to find the cameras." I helpfully pointed to the opposite teaching building. "The cameras you're looking for are over there. They can just capture this area, but it might be too late to delete the footage now because I've already copied it." Jessie let me ask again, "Did I push you?" Jessie bit her lip and looked at Mason, only to find him staring at her casted leg. You ran back to school alone with a cast on. Jessie was so anxious she almost cried. She babbled an explanation and finally had to admit, Mason, I'm sorry. I was so scared at the time. I thought it was Lily who pushed me, but actually, I accidentally fell down myself. Mason coldly shook her off and left without a word. The next day, under my threat, Jessie admitted in front of the whole class that she had fallen on her own in the second semester of my sophomore year. Emma and I applied to live in the school dormitory. She did it because her aunt had to leave town for work and didn't feel comfortable leaving her alone. I did it because I was fed up with Mason's fake attentiveness. In this life, I didn't have a deep bond with the Riley family. They just asked a few questions and then agreed, except Mason strongly opposed it. He asked me, why do you have to live in the school dormitory? While packing my things, I impatiently brushed him off. It's convenient and helps me study better. Ike. Mason didn't say anything more, and it was quiet behind me for a long time. Just when I thought Mason had left, I heard him suddenly say, You want to get away from me, don't you, Lily? I really thought we could start over, but you won't forgive me. You still hate me. I turned to look at Mason, deliberately asking him, Why should I hate you? Mason, you're so strange. First, you said you hated Jessie, and now you say you hate me. Mason looked at me for a long time. He slowly closed his eyes, then opened them and tugged at the corner of his mouth. So you really do hate me, Lily? Can you forget about the past life? Can't we start over? I stared at him, mocking. No more pretending, but Mason seemed oblivious to my obvious disdain. He continued talking to himself. Since God has given us a second chance, let's forget about the past and start over. Okay, Mason, he said. You were truly rotten to the core. Suppressing my anger, I glared at him. Mason, it wasn't you who got hurt in the past life. It wasn't you who lost everything, so you can easily say to forget the pain and start over. But why should I forget? Why should I start over with you, the one who inflicted harm? You can lightly say sorry, trying to erase all the victim's pain with just 3 words and seek forgiveness. He had such a beautiful thought, but Mason was still relentless. Lily, can I make up for everything you lost in the past life? Before I got engaged in the past life, you said you felt like the happiest little girl in the world. If you can let go in this life, you can still be that happy little girl, be good friends with Jessie, and we won't be siblings anymore. Mom and Dad won't oppose us being together. After graduating from college, we'll get married, and Mom and Dad will love you like their own daughter. We can live a happy life together. Lily, you can still be the happiest little girl in the world. Can we start over? I coldly refused him. No, in this life, I can never be friends with Jessie, and I can never marry you, Mason. When will you stop deceiving yourself? Mason retorted stubbornly. Lily, nothing is impossible. There was a mad glint in his eyes. Mason was a paranoid, unreasonable lunatic. I didn't know what he did. Soon Jessie also started living in the school dormitory, and she was assigned to my and Emma's dorm. She tried several times to be friendly to us, but we ignored her until the day before the final exam. Emma and I were studying in the dorm when Jessie suddenly burst in, crying and shouting at us. Why do you hate me so much? I've already apologized to you and tried to be nice. What more do you want? Today is my birthday, but I have to put up with your cold stares in this lousy dorm. I begged my mom to take me home, but Mason wouldn't let her. He's forcing me to be friends with you. I don't want to be friends with you. I hate you since I was a child. My mom has been telling me to please Mason so that he would like me so I could marry him in the future. I've always worked hard to do all those things, but why did everything I've worked for go to waste just because of you? Emma and I exchanged glances, watching Jessie collapse on the floor crying. Emma pulled me out of the dorm and asked me, Do you think I'm too cold to Jessie? I shook my head and told her, She bullied you. How you treat her is your right. No one can demand you forgive someone who hurt you. To me, Emma was already kind enough. At least when leaving the dorm, she threw a pack of tissues to the crying Jessie. After that day, Jessie became even stranger. She started clinging to Emma and me by any means necessary. She asked the teacher to change seats so she could sit behind me. Jessie created the illusion that we were good friends. She said, I've decided from now on I want to study hard with you guys and hopefully go to the same university. So she often asked me to help her with problems. Lily, please teach me. Jessie's tone reminded me of the past life. Back then, she was my best friend. Whenever Jessie acted quietly, she used the same tone. Emma secretly asked me, "Has Jessie really changed?" Echoing, "Art, Maybe I watched Jessie approach us from a distance. I softly told Emma, "But I still believe that people don't change suddenly. No one suddenly becomes bad, and no one suddenly becomes good." Days like this continued until the end of the college entrance exams. Just like Mason said, he was really trying to make up for what he owed me in our past life and was gradually helping me find what I had lost. Before my relationship with Jessie did improve a little with her unilateral efforts, the Riley couple also treated me better and better after the college entrance exams. They even brought me back to the Riley family home and said they wanted to throw me an 18th birthday party. Jessie found out about this when she came to the Riley family home to see me. She volunteered, "I want to help with Lily's birthday party too." Mason smiled and agreed. "Sure, you're Lily's best friend. You'll definitely make her happy if you help." After saying that, Mason looked at me with a meaningful expression. "Lily, your relationship with Jessie has really improved. Indeed, nothing is impossible." I knew what he meant by that, but I just smiled and didn't argue. On my birthday, Mason gave me a watch worth over $3 million. I didn't refuse and accepted it gladly. After all, my foster relationship with the Riley family would only last until I turned 18. After leaving the Riley family, I would need money for many things. If he was willing to give, I had no reason not to accept. The Riley family had a lot of influence in B-City. Even for my birthday party, many celebrities attended. Some of my classmates invited by Jessie also came. I only invited Emma. The birthday party was so grand and elaborate that both Emma and I felt a bit out of place. We hid in the backyard together. "What are your plans for the summer?" Emma took a small sip of juice and responded softly, "I plan to get a summer job, at least to earn enough for my freshman year living expenses." I rubbed the watch on my wrist and asked her to take me with her. Before I finished speaking, we suddenly heard a scream from inside the mansion. When Emma and I reached the second floor, Mason and Jessie were already dressed, but the ambiguous marks on their bodies and the messy bed in the bedroom made it easy to guess what had happened there. Mr. Riley slapped Mason in front of many guests. "How shameless can you be to do something like this?" Jessie stood in front of Mason crying and pleading for him. "Mr. Riley, don't blame Mason for a moment." The Riley family was in chaos. Mason saw me standing behind the crowd and tried to come over to explain but was stopped by Jessie's parents. "Mason, you can't leave. You need to give us an explanation." The party ended early. It wasn't until after 10 o'clock that the White family left the Riley family home. It seemed the two families had already discussed a solution, as they left with smiles on their faces and spoke politely. As I passed by the study on my way to bed, I overheard Mr. Riley talking to Mrs. Riley. "We'll have them get engaged in a few days. Start preparing for the engagement party." That night, Mason knocked on my door. I pretended not to hear. The next day, as I was about to leave with Emma to start our summer jobs, I was stopped by Mason. He explained to me, "I don't know what happened yesterday. I was drugged." I looked at him with a smile. "Were you drugged by someone else, or did you drug yourself?" Mason's eyes showed a pained expression. "How could I? Did you drug yourself? Why not?" I said mockingly, "Mason, in our past life, didn't you do it yourself? Ruin my reputation and then make me take the blame. In our past life, I always thought it was Jessie who did this to Mason until he confessed to me before I died." He said, "Lily, what could I do? I liked you. I actually liked my sister. I thought that if I did this, our parents would agree to let me marry you, but I didn't expect my dad to die from anger. Lily, if it wasn't for liking you, I wouldn't have caused my father's death and lived my life in guilt without even the courage to see my own mother. Lily, you were at fault too, so you should stay in hell with me." As he spoke, he suddenly hugged me tightly. "Lily, don't leave me. I was wrong. I really was wrong. I shouldn't have bullied you in our past life." Mason deceived others and himself. He could even entirely blame the drugging on me to numb himself and make himself feel better. He was always a coward who deceived himself, whether in our past life or this one. "I'm sorry, Mason. I begged for your forgiveness. I was wrong in our past life. I really know I was wrong. Please forgive me." But this time, it really wasn't me who did this. Believe me. He tried to reach out to me, but I avoided him like he was dirty as I turned to leave. I heard Mason say, "Lily, I'll break off the engagement with Jake Green. Wait for me." I walked away without looking back. When Emma came to the Riley's house to help me move things, it was almost time for university to start. The Riley couple had returned to their previous cold attitude towards me. When they heard that I was moving out, they only responded with a few perfunctory words. Everything was going smoothly, but unexpectedly, Mason came home early. He blocked my way. "Did your parents agree to you moving out?" Seeing me nod, he still couldn't believe it. "Impossible. My parents said they really like you and have always treated you as their own daughter. Wait here while I go ask them." While he went inside, Emma and I had already left with our things. After leaving the neighborhood, we ran into Jessie. Jessie? And no longer greeted us like she used to, nor did she go out of her way to please me and Emma. I thought she originally didn't want to bother with us, but for some reason, she suddenly turned around and called out to me, "Lily, did you really think I wanted to be friends with you?" To be honest, if it weren't for Mason's request, I wouldn't even glance at someone like you. Probably because she and Mason were already engaged. Jessie even leaned close to my ear and told me her secret. "Actually, on your birthday, it was me who dreaded Mason." I glanced at Jessie, feeling from the bottom of my heart that she and Mason were truly a perfect match. They could even come up with such disgusting methods together in the future. "I will marry him and join the Riley family, Lily. I don't really like Mason that much either, but there's no choice. My parents really want to ally with his family through marriage," Jessie told me in a bragging tone about all the benefits of marrying Mason. But I remained indifferent. No one knew better than me how painful it would be to marry someone like Mason. After parting ways with Jessie, Emma suddenly said, "Lily, you were right. No one suddenly becomes bad, and no one suddenly becomes good." She sighed. Fortunately, we didn't fall for it. For years after graduating from undergraduate studies, Emma and I did not choose to pursue further studies. We started a business on my 18th birthday. Mason had given me an expensive watch. I sold that watch, which became our startup capital. These past few years, with good luck and some memories from my past life, Emma and I have managed our company very successfully. I saw Mason again at a bidding event. Over the years, I had heard bits and pieces of gossip about him and Jessie. Not long after their marriage, they divorced. Initially, Jessie refused to divorce, but Mason always had his ways. She was tormented badly and eventually had to compromise. After the bidding ended, Mason caught up with me in the parking lot. He was at a loss for words, and after a long time, he only said, "I'm sorry, Lily." I glanced at him. "If you really feel sorry for me, then withdraw from the bidding." Mason paused and surprisingly agreed. "All right." Even so, I wouldn't take it seriously. Mason is extremely selfish. His apologies have always been just words. When it comes to matters of interest, Mason is clearer than anyone. I briefly told Emma about the bidding situation over the phone. Emma said, "If the Riley family is involved, do we still stand a chance?" I said, "Not necessarily. The fact that the Riley family is competing with a newly established company like ours only shows that the Riley family is really in decline. Just wait. This time we're sure to win." She sighed with relief. "Hearing you say that, I feel reassured. Emma trusts me very much. She always believes in me." The announcement of the winning bid was just as I expected. Excitedly, I turned around and headed outside, intending to find a quiet spot to call Emma. But when I turned back, I saw Mason standing not far behind me. Sunlight streamed through the glass windows, enveloping me in its warm glow, while Mason, a few steps away, was shrouded in the shadows cast by the wall. He pulled a corner of his mouth into a smile and congratulated me. "Congratulations." The smile on my face faded a bit, and I felt a sense of gloom on such a good day. How did I run into such an unlucky guy? But Mason was oblivious to this. He seemed unaware of my dislike and continued, "You asked me to withdraw from the bid last time, so I had them pull out. So I impatiently furrowed my brow. "Are you here to ask for a favor, Mr. Riley?" "I'm just casually mentioning it. I don't have the power to influence your decisions, do I?" Mason's emotions visibly began to panic. "That's not what I meant." He stammered. Lily, I just wanted to see you today to talk to you. Nothing else. I let out a sarcastic laugh. Willing to do anything. Mason nodded hastily. Yes, whatever you want me to do, I'm willing. All right, I said softly. Then, can you promise to never appear in front of me again, Mr. Riley? With that, I turned and walked away. After a few steps, I couldn't resist turning back. I saw Mason hunched over, trembling as he popped a few pills into his mouth. Noticing my gaze, he quickly straightened up, hiding the pill bottle behind his back. His eyes lit up as if seeing a ray of hope. There was no need for him to hide. I didn't care if he was sick or what medicine he was taking. I was just being honest about my feelings. Mason, honestly, I wish you would die, but I know you wouldn't agree to that, so just don't appear in front of me again. That way I can fool myself into thinking you're really dead. Having said that, I didn't linger any longer. The glass in the hall reflected his dejected figure like melted chocolate ice cream. Emma mentioned the Riley Corporation while discussing a project with me, and it made me realize that I hadn't seen Mason for a long time. It was as if he had truly disappeared. I couldn't help but recall that the last time I heard about him was a year ago. A partner's family member said he was ill. I didn't realize how scary depression could be. The young master of the Riley family was practically ruined. The old Mr. Riley had already retired, but now he had to come back. His son was perfectly fine, and then suddenly he got sick, staying at home all day, refusing to see anyone. Mrs. Riley even hired a priest to perform rituals at their house. It was just like being possessed by a ghost. He couldn't be exposed to light, couldn't see people, and any slight provocation triggered an episode. You haven't seen it? When he has an episode, it's terrifying. Lily? Emma poked my face. What are you thinking about? I shook my head with a smile, pulling my thoughts back to focus on work. How Mason was doing had nothing to do with me. I only knew that I was doing very well now. Friends, career, freedom, everything I wanted in my past life has been fulfilled in this one. I often sighed, feeling that God had truly favored me.